Loneliness is not a feeling, it is a physical wound, and your immune system treats it exactly like one. Right now, inside the body of someone who feels isolated, white blood cells called monocytes are shifting their genetic behavior. Researchers studying social isolation have found that loneliness triggers a specific pattern of gene expression, one that ramps up inflammation and quietly suppresses the body's antiviral defenses. Your cells are, in a very real sense, listening to your social environment and rewriting themselves in response to it. This is where the physics and biology of loneliness begin to bridge together. Scientists call this pattern the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, or CTRA, and it was first characterized by researchers at UCLA studying the molecular biology of social stress. When the brain perceives isolation as a threat, the sympathetic nervous system floods the body with signals, and those signals reach all the way down into the nucleus of individual immune cells, changing which genes get switched on and which get switched off. Loneliness does not stay in your head. It reaches your DNA. Most doctors do not have the 15 minutes it would take to walk a patient through this. A 7-minute appointment might mention social connection as a footnote, a soft suggestion to call a friend. But what is actually happening beneath the surface is a cascade with the precision of clockwork, layered mechanism upon mechanism. And today we are going to go through every layer of it, the way Feynman would have wanted, until the invisible becomes visible. The first mechanism is the inflammatory shift. Studies published through the Journal of Neuroscience and reviewed by Harvard Medical School have shown that chronic loneliness elevates circulating levels of inflammatory markers like interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein. These are molecules your body uses to fight infection and heal wounds, but when they stay elevated for months or years without an actual wound to heal, they begin to damage blood vessels, joints, and even the delicate tissue of the brain itself. Loneliness, biologically speaking, looks a great deal like a low-grade infection that never resolves. The second mechanism involves the vagus nerve, the long, wandering nerve that connects your brainstem to your heart, lungs, and gut. Vagal tone, a measure of how well this nerve regulates your heart rate in response to breathing, tends to be lower in people experiencing chronic loneliness. A healthy vagus nerve acts like a brake pedal on your stress response. When vagal tone weakens, that brake becomes less effective, and your body spends more time stuck in a mild, simmering state of alert, even when nothing dangerous is happening at all. The third mechanism is cortisol dysregulation. The National Institutes of Health and multiple studies indexed on PubMed have found that lonely individuals often show a flattened cortisol curve. Under normal conditions, cortisol should spike shortly after waking, giving you the energy to start your day, and then taper gradually as evening approaches. In chronic loneliness, that curve flattens out. The morning spike weakens, robbing you of a clean start, and the evening taper fails, leaving cortisol elevated at night when your body should be repairing itself in deep sleep. The fourth mechanism is sleep architecture itself. Research suggests that lonely individuals experience more micro-awakenings throughout the night, tiny fragmentary interruptions to sleep that they rarely remember in the morning, but that prevent the brain from reaching the deepest, most restorative stages of rest. Some researchers believe this is an evolutionary echo, a nervous system still wired for a time when sleeping without the protection of a group meant sleeping with one eye open. And the fifth mechanism, perhaps the most striking, involves the brain's reward circuitry. Neuroimaging studies have found that the ventral striatum, a region deeply involved in processing reward, actually responds differently to social cues in people who are chronically lonely, showing heightened sensitivity to social threat and blunted response to social reward. In other words, the lonely brain does not simply fail to enjoy connection as much. It becomes primed to notice rejection first before it notices warmth. It becomes a brain that flinches before it reaches out. Here is a way to picture the whole system at once. Imagine your body as a house, and your nervous system as the thermostat. A healthy connection to other people is like a thermostat that senses the room accurately, warms up when it's cold, cools down when it's warm, and mostly leaves you alone. Chronic loneliness breaks the thermostat's calibration. It starts reading every room as slightly too cold all the time. And so the furnace, your stress response, never fully shuts off. It runs quietly in the background for years, burning fuel, wearing down the machinery of the house, long before anyone notices the damage in the walls. This matters more, not less, as the body ages. After the age of 55, research from the American Heart Association indicates that the cardiovascular system becomes measurably more sensitive to chronic inflammatory load. Arteries that once tolerated inflammatory spikes with ease begin to stiffen more readily under the same conditions. The CDC has identified social isolation in older adults as a significant risk factor associated with elevated rates of heart disease, stroke, and even dementia. Findings echoed by NHS public health data in the UK, where loneliness among older adults has become a formal public health priority. The machinery of the aging body is simply less forgiving of a thermostat that never resets. And yet, after walking through 5 layers of molecular and neurological mechanism, the simplest actionable insight is almost embarrassing in how small it is. Studies suggest that even brief, low-effort social contact, a 5-minute phone call, a short conversation with a neighbor, a text message that expects a reply, can produce a measurable dip in cortisol within the same day. You do not need to solve loneliness to interrupt its biology. You only need to interrupt the silence, briefly, on a semi-regular basis, to give the thermostat a moment to recalibrate. But here is what almost no one knows about what happens next, and it is the part of this story that most articles never reach. Loneliness is not just influenced by your circumstances. It is in part self-perpetuating at the level of behavior itself. Because the reward circuitry becomes primed to detect social threat, a chronically lonely brain will often, unconsciously, interpret a neutral interaction, a friend who takes a day to text back, a family member who seems distracted, as evidence of rejection. This slightly distorted perception can lead to a subtle withdrawal, a small pulling away that reduces future contact, which then reinforces the very isolation that caused the distortion in the first place. Scientists studying this pattern have described it as a self-reinforcing loop, and understanding that this loop exists, that your brain's flinch reflex may not be reporting reality accurately, is often the first step toward breaking it. Step back far enough, and this entire cascade, the inflammation, the flattened cortisol curve, the fragmented sleep, the wary striatum, is simply matter behaving according to physical law. Every signal in this story is electrical and chemical, atoms and ions, moving along nerve fibers at measurable speeds, obeying the same universe that governs the orbit of planets and the decay of stars. There is something almost unbearably tender in that fact. The ache of missing another person is, at its root, made of the same particles that make up galaxies, organized by evolution into a system so sensitive that it can register the absence of a voice as a threat to survival. You were built, quite literally at the level of your genes, to need other people. That is not weakness. Research increasingly suggests it is closer to a design specification. None of this is meant to replace medical advice. If you are experiencing persistent low mood, prolonged isolation, or symptoms that concern you, a conversation with your doctor is a reasonable and important step, and organizations like the NHS and CDC offer resources specifically for older adults navigating this. If this explains something you have felt but never had words for, send it to someone who might need to hear it today. Sometimes the most scientific thing you can do for another person's biology is simply to call them. Because the next question is even stranger than this one. What is actually happening inside your body in the exact moment someone forgives you? The mechanism is unlike anything we have covered so far, and it starts, of all places, in the gut.